No one in the UK was prepared for what happened in Oxford, and that is precisely why this episode has become one of the clearest signs that Starmer's government has completely lost control of the country. Before everything exploded, Oxford was the last place anyone would imagine seeing chaos, smoke, and students running in panic between medieval buildings. It was the nation's intellectual heart, a symbol of stability and British pride. But, at 3:42 in the afternoon, in a few seconds that seemed torn from a war film, a single red flare cut through the sky as if announcing the collapse of an era. That flare did not just illuminate the ancient towers and libraries, it exposed the moral and political failure lurking beneath Keir Starmer's arrogant, authoritarian, and disastrous decisions. And this is where your 45-plus patriotic audience, tired of seeing the UK dragged into chaos by the left, needs to understand. It was not a protest, it was a warning that when even Oxford loses patience, it is because the whole country is on the brink of breaking. And the most shocking thing? All this happened because the government tampered with exactly what the British people have always defended: freedom, tradition, and respect for academic institutions. When the first 2,800 students began gathering on High Street, no one imagined the size of the bomb about to explode. It was supposed to be a routine protest, the kind police observe calmly, and that ends with a few lukewarm speeches, some photos, and nothing more. But not that day. Not after Starmer's shadowy decisions, not after the rushed and silent signing of the new academic surveillance directive, a measure many experts already call the biggest attack on British intellectual freedom since the 1970s. And when that rumor spread through the college corridors, something happened that the government failed to predict. Fear turned to anger, anger turned to movement, and movement turned to revolt. From that moment on, every meter of that historic street became pure gunpowder. And all it took was one flare, a single flash, for everything to detonate. What was noise became a scream. What was a crowd became a stormy sea. What was discontent became direct confrontation with the police. And as Oxford split in two before the nation's eyes, one phrase emerged from all sides, repeated like a verdict: Starmer caused this. The emotional explosion of that moment was not just noise. It was the reflection of a feeling that has been growing across the UK, the sense that Starmer has crossed every possible line. And this became even clearer when the first physical clash occurred. All it took was the initial push for the police cordon to give way, as if it were made of paper. The crowd, already fueled by adrenaline and indignation, surged forward, turning the narrow street into a corridor of absolute tension. Police raised shields, tried to give orders, tried to reorganize their formation. But it was too late. Screams, running, objects flying, drums crashing to the ground. Red smoke seeped into the alleys as if the city itself were bleeding. Every second, the situation spiraled further out of control. Oxford, Britain's academic jewel, was becoming a symbol of something much bigger, a country that has lost patience with a government that insists on unpopular, authoritarian decisions disconnected from reality. For your audience, who remember a strong, stable, respected UK, this is a wound that hurts even more. And if there was any doubt that the situation had passed the point of no return, it vanished when the third flare hit the open window of an academic building. The explosion of light and smoke sent students running in all directions, some stumbling, others crying, others screaming for help. Inside the struck library, alarms blared as if Oxford were under military attack. Staff tried to close doors as the smell of smoke invaded corridors that, until that day, had known only silence and the pages of ancient books. It was at that moment the city officially collapsed. Much is said about political consequences, but there is something deeper here. Oxford represents the intellectual soul of the nation, and seeing it consumed by chaos has awakened in millions of Britons a bitter sense that the country is sliding down a dangerous path, a path many blame directly on Starmer's blind, stubborn, ideological choices. Within minutes, chaos spread like an electric current through the entire city. Libraries were hastily closed. Not one, not two, but 8 of the country's oldest and most respected institutions. For many Britons over 45, who grew up hearing about Oxford's grandeur, its history, traditions, and legendary alumni, that number landed like a punch to the gut. It was irrefutable proof that something was deeply wrong. And as iron gates slammed shut with metallic echoes through the narrow streets, videos began to spread like a digital epidemic. Clip after clip showed students running, sirens drowning out screams, police carrying unconscious or injured young people. In seconds, hashtags dominated all platforms. Oxford falls, Starmer academic spring, Britain in chaos. For a government that thrives on propaganda and rehearsed speeches, these images were a nightmare, because the whole country saw, unfiltered, the result of policies that have been suffocating universities, families, and British freedom. As the videos went viral, reality on the streets continued to deteriorate. The Radcliffe camera, the ultimate symbol of academic elegance, became a scene of confrontation. Students running across the circular lawn, smoke rising from flares, police trying to hold a line that broke with every new surge of the desperate crowd. And all this against the backdrop of a question that began to grow like a roar. How far did Starmer think he could go without facing resistance? It was impossible to ignore the symbolic power of that moment. When Oxford falls, it is not just a city protesting, it is the very heart of Britain crying out for help. And for the older, conservative audience, who lived in a time when order, tradition, and respect still meant something, watching this collapse live was almost like seeing the country lose its own identity. And it was not just Oxford that felt the impact. The whole country stopped to watch, incredulous, as the city that had always represented intellectual stability plunged into absolute panic. Shops pulled down shutters violently. Tourists ran for cover. Cyclists abandoned bikes in the middle of the street as if fleeing a war zone. Official alerts began popping up on phones. Shelter in place. Avoid High Street. Lockdown at all colleges. The feeling was that the UK was witnessing a chapter that should never have been written. And meanwhile, in British homes, especially among the over 45s, indignation grew. Many commented that, in the days of strong, patriotic governments, nothing like this would ever have happened. For them, seeing Oxford fall was like seeing the end of a country that was once a world reference, now handed over to chaos because of a weak, disconnected government, led by someone who insists on decisions no one asked for and almost no one supports. Inside the colleges, professors watched everything unfold on internal TV screens, completely paralyzed. Seasoned academics, used to intense debates, university politics, ideological conflicts, but never real violence. Many simply could not believe what they were seeing. Buildings stained with paint, libraries locked down, sirens echoing like in dystopian films. And the phrase repeated among them was always the same. This never happened, not even in the worst years. Some openly blamed the police, others the students, but most pointed to the real trigger, the directive signed by Starmer. For many, it was the final blow to a government that had already been showing itself to be increasingly authoritarian and out of touch with the reality of the British people. And meanwhile, city residents watched in horror as centuries-old buildings were vandalized, wondering how the UK, a nation of order and tradition, had come to this. Before we go on, let me ask you something important. If you also feel that the UK deserves real leadership, and not this chaos we are seeing under Starmer's government, then click subscribe now and leave a like. Your participation is what stops this information from being buried. Every like, every subscription pushes this video to more people who still do not understand the scale of the crisis we are living through. You are part of this, and the country needs more Britons to wake up. As Oxford burned with tension, the rest of the UK watched with a dangerous mix of shock, fear, and identification. The live scenes touched something deep, something that had been growing in the hearts of Britons for months, the sense that Starmer's government has completely lost its way. And nothing exposed this as brutally as the numbers that began to appear on news screens. Over 100 arrested, dozens injured, 8 libraries closed, an entire city in lockdown. It was impossible for the government to control the narrative, especially when videos showed students crushed against barriers, overwhelmed police, and historic buildings marked by fire and paint. For your most patriotic, conservative audience, each image sounded like a painful reminder that the UK is being led by someone incapable of protecting even the cradle of British intelligence. And for the first time, millions saw Oxford not as an isolated incident, but as a clear symptom of a disease that began in Downing Street. At the political heart of the country, desperation began to take shape. Inside Downing Street, the chaos was as intense as in the streets of Oxford, only silent, cold, and full of political fear. Ministers were pulled from engagements, aides ran through corridors with tablets showing heat maps, dispersal routes, predictions of unrest in other cities. And at the center of it all, Keir Starmer's tense face, staring at images of an Oxford that seemed to have turned into a battlefield. His advisors tried to suggest statements, strategies, scapegoats. Some said to condemn the students, others to blame misinformation, others to blame extremist forces. But no one dared say out loud what everyone was thinking. Starmer lost Oxford, and whoever loses Oxford loses the country. The information that hit like a bomb in that room was even worse. 61% of the population supported the students, and only 22% supported the government. It was the numerical confirmation of what the streets had already shown. Starmer had not only lost control, he had also lost the trust of the British people. But amid the chaos, something unexpected began to emerge. And this is crucial to hold your audience's attention, as it reveals the contrast that further exposes the government's failure. As students ran, flares burned, and sirens echoed, small moments of humanity appeared like sparks in a stormy night. A young woman fallen to the ground was helped up by 2 classmates who, though terrified, tried to protect her from the crowd. A police officer broke formation to rescue an unconscious student, ignoring shouted orders behind him. Elderly professors placed themselves between groups of young people and the police line, calling for calm, repeating that they are students, not enemies. These moments, which quickly went viral, showed something Starmer's government has never demonstrated: compassion, courage, and a real sense of duty. And while they moved the nation, they also served to devastatingly expose Downing Street's leadership collapse. Because while the people showed humanity, the government showed only hesitation. While those on the ground acted, Starmer just watched, paralyzed, lost, unable to unite or control the nation. As night fell over Oxford, the images became even more symbolic. The darkness only made the red of the flares look like real fire, illuminating ancient buildings as if the past were calling out to the present for help. Helicopters hovered over the city, libraries remained locked, and crowds still spread through the streets in disorganized groups, tired, angry, scared. The BBC, Sky News, and GB News looped the same question that was already echoing in British homes. If Oxford has fallen, who will be next? and that question became a nightmare for the government. On social media, the term Starmer lost Oxford dominated without resistance, like a verdict written by the people themselves. Even those who had never cared about politics began to comment that this was not normal, that something deep had broken, that the country was losing its soul. For your audience, patriotic, conservative, and tired of seeing the UK weakened, this night was not just an incident. It was an emotional tipping point, a warning that the time has come to question whether Starmer is really capable of leading the country away from the abyss he himself created. By the way, before we continue, comment below where you are watching from. UK, Europe, Brazil, USA. It is astonishing how this crisis is echoing around the world, and I want to know how far this truth is reaching. Your comment helps show that Britons, wherever they are, still care deeply about the future of our nation. With the whole country paralyzed before their screens, a silent understanding began to spread through British homes. It was not just Oxford in crisis. It was the entire UK, every flare, every corridor filled with smoke, every student running between historic buildings seemed to symbolize something much bigger: the loss of trust in the government, the sense of abandonment, the fear that British identity was being eroded by wrong, authoritarian political decisions disconnected from the real country. And this deeply affected the older, traditional, patriotic audience, who grew up believing in order, respect, and stability. For these people, the symbolic fall of Oxford was not seen as a mere student protest, but as a national message of despair, a reaction to years of empty promises and fragile policies. And while Starmer hesitated, hid behind generic speeches and cold analyses, the country wanted answers, answers he did not seem capable of giving. For the first time, millions openly asked, if the Prime Minister has lost Oxford, what else is he incapable of protecting? When the last images of the night emerged, exhausted students sitting on pavements, police dragging away destroyed barricades, silent libraries behind iron doors, the UK already understood that this was not just a chaotic day. It was a turning point, a breaking point. Oxford sent a message that crossed generations, parties, and cities. The country no longer trusts the path Starmer is forcing upon it. And this warning echoes louder than ever today. Because if even the calmest, most studious, and traditional city in the country could boil over in a few hours, then what is to stop Manchester, Bristol, Cambridge, or even London from following the same path? The fear is now real, tangible, national, and every Briton, especially those who lived through stronger, more sovereign times, knows, deep down, that this government no longer has the moral authority or political strength to contain what is to come. In the end, Oxford did not fall alone. Oxford was just the first to say out loud what millions were already thinking. The UK needs real leadership. And as long as Starmer remains in power, the crisis will only deepen.